It was a gun.
I'm not voting.
If we want to build our nation.
The problem with the Somalians.
Just want to experience something else than a black man.
Move on, move
Can't be
forward.
like a horse with blinkers on.
Honestly say, I was about to have
Corrupt
sex and then I pulled
crap,
up.
but it's nice.
I'm Joe Mennel, one of the directors of Street Talk.
My name is Nikki Edwards, and I am the international coordinator and facilitator for the Pocket Rehab Coaching Network. And basically, I have been in recovery for almost 7 years on the 6th of August.
I'm David Collins. I'm the founder of the Ubuntu Addiction Community Trust, which is a public benefit organization in South Africa. And we train people, we teach empowering skills, and we treat substance use disorder.
I'm Mureeda. I'm a certified professional recovery coach. I'm also the co-founder of the schools program for the Ubuntu Addiction Community Trust. I'm also the co-manager at the Foundation Clinic.
As I said in the introduction, it's actually from the 6th of August, 7 years ago, I came into recovery. Basically, I've been in and out of rehab facilities for the last 15 years of my life. I was in active addiction for almost 20 years of my life. And, through that process, I basically lost everything, including my son and my family, and found myself out on the streets with absolutely, nothing and no one to turn to. It was only then that I really started to get some hope and a will to live, if that makes sense.
5 years ago, I lost my daughter in a car accident. And I was completely lost and didn't know what I wanted to do. But I knew I needed to do something around addiction, because I grew up in addiction. My dad was an addict, and it had a lot of impact on our lives growing up as a child. And later on in my life, when I got married years later, my husband also became an addict. And when I lost my daughter, I knew I needed to find meaning and purpose in my life.
My story is very quickly is that my children were needed to be put into foster care because of my crack and heroin problem back in '96. And since then I've been working in this field and trying to rebuild my life. And the biggest challenge has been the stigma of it.
I was addicted to cocaine and alcohol, but I pretty much tried everything under the planet in my years of exploration and dependency, or whatever you want to call it. I also suffer from a mental health issue, which obviously had a huge impact on my life, and on, I was very much linked to the substance use that I was involved in.
Standing in Weinberg's magistrate's court and having your children taken away, that is a low point. And it makes my voice quiver when I talk about it. But then there was also that at the time the thinking that goes, shit, well, now I've got an even better reason to go and use. So it's a madness. It's a madness. So that was a real low point for me, and something that I feel deeply ashamed about. And I've spent a lot of my life recovering from that shame. So not living in it, but recovering from it.
I would agree with David. Standing in that courtroom and having to sign over custody of my child was probably the lowest points in my life. And yeah, That's where I carry the most shame around that. The rest of it is all kind of a bit of a blur. Like David says, you know, when I was using, it was a solution to a lot of my problems and a lot of the emotional distress and emotional baggage and hurt and pain that I was carrying in my life, and how I felt about myself and the world. It worked for a while, and then it didn't, and I found myself in this perpetual cycle of shame and guilt and pain. And I mean, the drugs just weren't working anymore. The alcohol wasn't working anymore. I mean, you know, being homeless, living on the street wasn't even as bad as some of the things that I've experienced, you know, through my addiction and my substance use. There was a lot of shame around myself, you know, discovering that I had a kind of mental health issue as well. That was also like, you know, there was definitely something wrong with me. It's not the world. There's something wrong with me. And I think that's where the stigma comes in, because I grew up thinking that there was something wrong with me. And the world's, you know, the world treated me unfairly, and I was completely misunderstood. You know, I was shamed, I was blamed, I was suppressed, oppressed, and I was totally all alone growing up. I felt all alone, and that just kind of manifested in my life.
And Mureeda, what would you say was when you figured you'd reached just rock bottom?
So it was definitely the year I lost my daughter, because I didn't only lose her that year. I lost my home, my family got broken up. Yeah, so I've been in recovery, even though I'm not an addict. I've been in recovery since then. For me, recovery is gaining back what I've lost while my husband was in active addiction and when my dad was in addiction. So for me, gaining myself back, gaining my strength back to be able to go out and make a difference in other people's lives. Yeah. So definitely the year I lost my child, I got a spiritual awakening that I wasn't scared of losing anything, even though I lost everything that year. Nothing meant, it didn't mean as much to me losing my home, but losing my child made me choose life.
I mean, my life has just changed completely. I've gotten my son back 4 years ago. I have my family back. I'm empowered. I run my own practice now, and I spend my life assisting others in trying to find their meaning and purpose in their life.
My cousin was working at the foundation clinic at the time, and I met David Collins and the whole team, and they all inspired me, and I decided to do the recovery coach training so that I could find what I really wanted to do with myself. And I wanted to do something around the youth, like to help the youth, because as a child growing up with addiction, I saw what it did to our family. So my cousin and I decided to do a schools program around addiction and peer pressure, and so that we could start touching their lives before they become adults and go into this crazy life, you know.
In my last rehabilitation center that I went to, it was 6 months into that I just suddenly had this overwhelming kind of sense of self, and this people call it a spiritual experience, but I'm not quite sure if that was it. It was more of a sort of a real kind of grounding and a sense of like I wanted to live. I wanted to live, and I wanted to fight for myself. I wanted to fight for my child. I wanted my family back. And there was this deep knowing that there was a bigger picture, a reason for me. And it's not something that I could cognitively, explain. It's more of a sort of spiritual experience that I had. And that is basically that was the point where my life started to change. I was in that rehab for another 6 months after that. And when I came out, I thought to myself, well, I spent 20 years in active addiction. What am I going to do with my life? I've had various different jobs, from management to running guest houses to waitressing to marketing. I just had no idea where to go or what to do. But I knew that it had to be, in this field. I had to kind of help others and assist others in trying to reach recovery and to try and find meaning and purpose in their life, as did I.
Both these women here have really turned their lives around in tragic situations and are making a huge impact in the world. And in today's world, I think that's needed even more and more. The rise of mental illness and the consequences of substance use disorder has gotten worse with the COVID, and with people losing jobs and the economy, and 75% of youth being unemployed under the age of 30, and all this stuff is adding tremendous psychological stress to everyone. And substance abuse is a solution that becomes a problem.
Yeah.
And the problem is then that people keep going back to the old solution that stopped working. And that's really what our role is to coach people out of that. So we're not therapists, we're not counselors. What we are is coaches that have been trained to behave and show up in a professional way that empowers change, by using, for want of a better word, creating an adult learning environment that empowers people to take responsibility for their life and their recovery based on their own individual needs, values, and culture.
My dream is to educate the youth around addiction and to educate family members around addiction and to break the stigma.
My dream is to live out my meaning and purpose. And to support and assist my son in the best way I know how.
To cure the world of addiction by empowering personal responsibility. Hussa.
Personally, I would tell everyone out there that's going through this, if it's a family member, to go out and reach for help and to reach out to their family for support, and not to be ashamed of it, and to take the necessary steps to go into a rehab and speak about it. Because for me, many years ago, the hardest thing for me was taking my husband to a rehab and admitting to the fact that he has a problem. And if I had done it many years ago, I think my life would have been different. So I would just say that you should reach out.
Yazi, you should ever sit and talk with people, or else take a walk and create a straight talk. Talk what is nice, it will make you feel stronger. Listen what is right and say what is wrong. You should ever sit and talk with people, or else take a walk and create a straight talk. Talk what is nice, it will make you feel stronger. Listen what is right and say what is wrong.